Good evening, TheoTrade. This is Corey Rosenblum, and you're watching the Theo nightly video for the 30th of June here in 2022 as we end the second quarter of 2022, and that's what we'll start with. We will be looking at the main idea of the big picture here in the S&P. We'll track through all of these just in a moment, but on a percent basis. And what are we doing? Comparing, contrasting. Since the beginning of the year, the market opened here. There's the high of the year, which actually opened up right there, just about as the new year started. So good times back then as the market continued the downtrend, and as we call it, the bear market. Meaning the bear market is defined as a percent change, 20% off the high. So right there is the S&P. But how do you get this chart? How do you compare, and how might you look at individual stocks? So under chart scale here in thinkorswim, I just have the daily chart up, and we'll just go down to show price as percentage. So that's all we'll do is the chart scale on auto and then show price as percentage. That way you can put a line chart. That'd be probably much better. Let's do that. We'll put them in a line chart and just highlight this chart type line. And that might be a little more perspective. Get everything else off the chart and just get a clear perspective of percent. So again, looking as we start the video and the new quarter of 2022, the S&P, the future market at least, we'll go back to the S&P-X, is off about 21% from the highs. Nasdaq is the market. Remember, the market peaked a little bit before in November of 2021, but nonetheless, since this is looking at the quarter basis, and that's what the video is, quarter, or at least the first 6 months here in 2022, the Nasdaq Technology Centric Index reached its bear market earlier, again 20% off the high. It's down 30%, so 10% less or greater than the S&P. The Dow Mini Futures are off 15%, again just looking at the market high from the last 6 months. And to confirm that, just looking at the time axis year to date. And that takes us the first 2 quarters. And the Russell, the small cap, is off 25%. We'll come back to crude in a moment, but gold, strangely enough, again, this is where I scratch my head, and given how much inflation is out there and how much discussion is on inflation, gold, at least GC, gold futures, we'll look at silver, which is similar. Silver, actually down 8%. So just looking at the ETFs of GLD, flat as can be, quite literally flat as can be. There's the opening of the year, and there's the halfway point of 2022. Nothing going on there. But silver is actually down about 10%. And the bond market as seen by TLT, that's a tradable ETF, popular ETF that we can trade. TLT is down about 20%. And that's where a lot of the large destruction of wealth, or at least in portfolios across the board, if people do go away from the stock market or leave or sell assets, long-term equity portfolios in stocks, well, they'll rotate and buy bonds. Here's the double whammy. SPY, which is a popular ETF, one I trade very actively, is down 21%. You might think the bond market will be up a similar amount, but no, the bond market is down 20% as well. So there is where 2022 has been a difficult year for long-term investors across the board. There wasn't a safety haven in the bond market. That's going to be true in ZN, which is a tradable ETF, which is a futures contract actually, and the ZB, which is the 30-year treasury note. Not down as much, a treasury bond. Not down as much, of course, as the TLT, but I tend to focus on the TLT when I'm discussing the bond market. Now let's go back to crude. Being in an inflationary environment, crude oil is actually up, believe it or not, 30, almost 40% as we go into the third quarter of the 2022 year. And that is in large part because of inflationary concerns. We can look at some of the other commodities. Look at copper, just to name one. And copper itself down on the year, and that's just a little bit of inflation up, down. We can look at wheat, just again naming a few commodities at almost random here. Looking at wheat, wheat's up about 20%. In fact, we have a list of commodities we follow. And just to name a few of them, heating oil, silver, platinum, palladium, just looking at some of those where they are. So not a big change in platinum and then palladium, not things you might see us discuss here at TheoTrade on a daily basis, probably even a weekly basis, but these are in the commodity sector. And ZS is going to be soybean. Again, not see us discuss soybean, but the theme is inflation. And some of the commodities, particularly some of the food-based commodities or energy oil-based commodities, are up and remain up in this year. Soybeans being one of them, being up about 20%. There's wheat. We just saw wheat, which had its pullback. But believe it or not, before that pullback, wheat prices were up about 50% from year to about into May. And then oats, just naming a few, down 10%. And live cattle, we won't do anything else. But there are a lot of other futures contracts you can look at, but just naming a few of them and where they are. So that's the theme 2022 as we go the halfway point. Inflation, inflation, inflation. And that has to do with a rise in commodity prices. But taking a look at the TNX, TNX is your 10-year Treasury note yield. And that's going to be similar to TLT. That's where the rates have gone up. Rates are around 3%. But that TNX, this is what Don talks about, and how quick, how rapid that the rate market has increased. Now that's strange to say this, but rates have gone, it started the year, and they were up 100%. Let's take our chart away from our percent and see why that is a big deal. So it's a big move from roughly 1.2% in the year, or 1.5%, up to 3. So that 3, when you say 30 on the TNX, that refers to the yield. We're looking closely at the 2% yield, which was hit earlier in 2022. There's 2022 actually, was hit earlier and went all the way to 3.5. So that is the theme as we're going through the midpoint of 2022. Inflation, yields rising, interest rates going up, borrowing cost or cost of capital, loans, business, home, personal, all the loan prices, all the yields are going up. And that is having a bearish effect on some parts of the economy and some parts of the stock market more than others. Just to name one would be technology. Again, technology seen through XLK or seen through the Nasdaq, which again peaked in November, and also seen through that ETF, the QQQ, which also peaked around November. And that has a large percent decline. Some of the leading or the key stocks, looking at Meta, just to name a few here, also peaked earlier September, and that's down. We won't even look at percent changes, but that is down from 380 per share down to 160. And others would include Google on a long-term basis, daily chart basis. Amazon, that's a retailer. We don't think of it as a technology, but a retail company. Of course, Netflix, which is a streaming service. Now that's one you just have to be amazed at how that percent loss and where the percent chart would show down 75%, not necessarily from 2022, the beginning, but again, the Nasdaq sector and some of the main monsters of tech or tech stocks in general that make up the Nasdaq, they peaked well in advance of the S&P and some of the other indexes. And nonetheless, Netflix, just to naming one, is a stock that fell 75% from that peak. And as we go into the remainder of the year, these themes continue, which is bear market, recession, going into an economic recession. Are we already in a recession? Will this downside or sell side activity continue? That seems to be the case. And that bear market will push, if true, well under these levels. So thinking about bottoms being reversal, that was not a bottom, that was not a bottom, that was not a bottom, and the key question will be, is that a bottom? And the answer is going to probably come back, no, not a bottom either. And that's just as the bear market or sell side, downside, downtrend continues in equity prices, in sectors such as financials, which is off similar or near those lows. Of course, looking at technology, that's XLK. Y is going to be this consumer discretionary, or think retail. I is going to be industrials. B will be the material sector. That is a new 52-week low in the material sector. E is the only one that has a strange bullish uptrend, and that's in large part because of commodities tied right into crude oil. And then we get the defensive names such as consumer staples, P, again XLP, and the tradable XLV, which is healthcare. That's a little more of a trading range. That's sideways, not a trend there. And finally, utilities, which has itself, if we want to think of it this way, a little bit of a bullish trend. Now, in general, the utility sector serves similarly, at least in terms of the equities, to what bonds would do in terms of safety, because they generally give a high dividend or a high yield. They're thought to be more stable and more on the safe side of the investing world. Again, that's within the sectors of the market. So not everything is bearish, not everything is affected the same. Some of the sectors, again, retail mainly. We can also take a look at Walmart and Nike and others. In fact, we'll conclude the video just with a quick look at some of the stocks in the S&P 500 that just made new 52-week lows. The names are familiar: NVIDIA, JP Morgan, Bank of America, Nike, Advanced Micro, Honeywell, American Express, John Deere, Citigroup, PayPal, and the list goes on. Target and others. So retail, financials, and technology stocks continue to be on the sell side of the market, and some of the defensive sectors, they're holding up, but holding up well in a bear market is not, it's cold comfort across the board. So as we go into the next quarter of 2022, of course, protect your account, protect your spreads and your option positions in anything long-term or short-term. Keep a refresh on those and take a little time this weekend to look at where your positions are, where the account is up, down, and where hedges are, need to be put on, taken off, and anything else in a midway checkup through 2022. As always, be careful and safe. This is Corey Rosenblum with tonight's Theo video update for June 30th, 2022.